Welcome into another edition of the Talkin Solutions podcast. Leonie Sanderson, the co-founder of the Aging Revolution, joining us today. And Leonie, thank you so much for hopping on and having this episode with me today. And how are you?
Great, Will. Thanks so much for having me.
And Leonie, you and I have a bit of a time difference. You're over in Brisbane in Australia, my first guest from Australia. I've had guests from various other countries, but you're the first from Australia and that side of the world. So that's even a little bit more special on that front, I think.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, it's 9 a.m. here, and it's a public holiday for the death of the Queen in Queensland.
Oh, well, there we go. That makes a lot of sense, of course. And then, of course, the history between Australia and England and the UK in general, of course, on that front. We did not have that here. Although people in America certainly follow the royal family and whatnot more than you would think. But we're not here to discuss the royal family or anything of that nature. We're here to discuss what you have going on as the co-founder of the Aging Revolution, which is something I find very fascinating. I think aging in society in general is something that kind of has a weird stigma about it. It's just kind of this thing that's just kind of there, even though it's a inevitable thing for all of us on that front. So, Leonie, if you could just kind of give me a background of just what exactly y'all are doing over at the Aging Revolution and what it is exactly.
Sure. So the Aging Revolution has been around now for about 6 or 7 years. It's founded by myself and my partner, Simon Lowe. When we first conceived the idea, we were really interested in the aging system and how we might shift it, because what we'd seen was that from our own personal experience and also from our work life experience, that aging was one of those things where people had what you just said, people have a very negative view of growing older. And for us, we were both like, well, why? Why do we have this idea that getting older is such a terrible thing? I mean, isn't that what we all want to do? We all want to grow to live along and grow older and live a long life. Hopefully that's what we want to do. So why does aging get such a bad rap? So we started off with a road trip and we went around probably about 2/3 of Australia talking to people about aging and growing older. From there, we sort of went, what are the things that we could, after listening to what people have said, how could we solve some of these problems that we heard cropping up again and again? And that's kind of where we kicked off. We found technology and we use different types of technology, but we also use creative methods to challenge ageism, because at the root of most of the problems that people were talking about, that's what it is. It's ageism that we're kind of challenging and fighting against to shift those perspectives on aging. So we use a bunch of different methods, and we've come up with, we've had quite a few different projects over time, and we're still trying to push those, what we would call stereotypical thoughts about aging and older people every day.
Yeah, and I'm really excited to get into some of those methods, strategies, and solutions that you've provided for. And we're certainly going to talk a lot about that as well. But before we kind of jump directly into that, I do want to talk about that kind of stigma and ageism and that thought process of it, because I see it all the time. I'm still, what I think society would call young, right? And so with that being said, I have some friends that'll be like, I'm not getting old. I'd rather just die. And I'm always so perplexed. And I think maybe I'm weird amongst them or something, because I hear that at times and I'm kind of like, what? Isn't it better if you're getting older? It means you're still living, which means that you've done some things right successfully with that as well. So why is it that you think over time kind of ageism has gotten, or people growing old or young people when they see older people, and why do you think that negative stigma kind of is there to begin with in the first place?
Yeah, so I think it's important to note that we're probably talking about a very Western, Anglo-Saxon, sure, Anglo-Celtic frame a lot of the time. So when it comes to ageism, not that it doesn't seep into other cultures, but I think that's probably the main frame that we see presented in our countries, and where we devalue older people and we value youth. So and we have this, and especially for women, I think there's this idea that aging equals less desirable, less beautiful, and therefore less powerful. And I would challenge that. I would say that's probably not the case. The other part of it is, I think, like for you, like if you've got that attitude, there's probably a pretty good chance that you've had a good relationship with an older person in your life. Because what we see is that people who have good attitudes about growing older have probably had a significant relationship with somebody else who was older, who acted as a bit of an inspiration or a role model for them. And they can see that aging is not something to be scared of. And that's the kind of attitude we really want to promote, because we know that ageism is actually really negative for people and their health. So people who have less ageist beliefs tend to live longer, and they live a more healthy older age. So there's been a really interesting study, like even if you've had the gene that predisposes you to Alzheimer's, positive beliefs can actually help you to withstand that, I guess, at some level. So there are really important reasons why ageism is something that we should be tackling. And for myself, I think it was really selfish reasons. So my mum is 83, nearly 84, and I wanted a better older age for her. But I also want a better older age for me, because I look around and I think like, well, I don't want the old age that's necessarily shared as that this is what I should be expecting and this is what's going to happen to me. I want to challenge that. And I think the only way to do that is actually kind of put my money where my mouth is and make it happen.
Yeah. First and foremost, thanks for the clarification. Yeah, we're all talking kind of like the Western Anglo-Saxon kind of viewpoint of aging in this society on that front, particularly what you see in the US, Australia, the UK, places like that. Secondly, within what you just said too, so many questions really, but one of them that comes to mind is, or actually a comment first, is I do think you're really right. I think that's a great point about the relationships that younger people have with older people. I think that goes with human nature in general. What you don't know kind of fears and scares you a little bit, right? I mean, that goes for all types of topics. And if you don't have a strong relationship with a grandparent or another elderly figure in your life growing up, or even while you're in your young adult years, I can definitely see how that could cause that. I was fortunate. I mean, I've had strong relationships with elderly people who aren't even, related to me or anything like that, who I come to pass with. One gentleman in mind in Missouri, I spent a couple years with. I learned so much from him. So that, and then that leads kind of to that question that I kind of had in the back of my mind when you were talking about that answer, and you were kind of diving through everything and dissecting it from that ageism and trying to challenge it for a better life for you and a better life for your mother and things of that nature. One thing that people, and we're seeing in society today, is more and more people are growing older, which is a good thing. We're living longer and things, but as a world population, people are getting older and they're staying healthier, having a lot more quality years. So I think I would say that would probably even add more of an important emphasis of why we have to do that, because I don't think in too long we're going to continue to have an older and older population. And if there's more discontent and all that type of stuff, we might run into some problems.
Absolutely. Like the aging of the population, I think it's, we've been talking about this as a problem for probably at least 20 years. So it's one of those things that we've known it's coming and we know that it's happening, but there's still not a generalized, huge will to do something about it. I think even now, although I think, it's got better in the last 3 or 4 years, I'm starting to see more and more things coming out about the language that we use around older people, recruitment and age discrimination in the workforce. So starting to see these things bubble up a lot more. And part of that is because the baby boomers were such a huge cohort. And I use that term just so that people know exactly who I'm talking about, because I kind of think we probably should be ditching a lot of the labels around older age and aging, because they divide us, they don't unite us. But for people who were born post-war, are a very large cohort of older people, and they probably challenge some of those stereotypes a little bit more. But we're also seeing people who want to stay in the workforce longer because they are healthier, or because they have to, because the inequity has grown a little bit as well. So we've got, older people who are getting towards that last part of their life, but still have to work because they need to. And if they can't challenge the ageism in the workplace, then what happens next? So there's so many reasons why we should be challenging ageism on a daily basis. It's mind blowing. But yeah, especially and I think some countries have a much better view of older people, and they're still also facing challenges. So even though we've got this sort of a little bit more ingrained that ageing is a negative thing in the US and the UK and Australia, I think other countries equally face a challenge with people growing older because they haven't had that many older people before. And China is probably a great example where the ageing population is really starting to rear its head, I guess, as something that it's a problem that needs to be solved. Not that older people need to be solved, but some of those issues that are there for older people, they need a little bit of fresh thinking.
Yeah. You mentioned the other cultures in society, right? My mom's side of the family and whatnot is kind of Venezuelan and Latin American. And, you think about them and how they treat the elderly. And, typically your grandparents, your mother, they live with you. And I know some Asian cultures are similar to that as well, but they grow old and they live with you. So you're exposed to an older generation of people almost on a daily basis as a young person kind of growing up versus in the US or in the UK or Australia, for example, we put older people in retirement homes and things of that nature. And that's just where they go, or you don't see them as often because they might live farther away. So I think that could potentially play a role too. But one thing that you've mentioned as well with ageism and the issues that we have with workforce discrimination and things of that nature as well. How do you think neglecting the older population could kind of hurt society as a whole, maybe through an economic perspective, a social perspective, a cultural perspective, or things of that nature, if we continue to not really try to solve this issue and just neglect it?
It boggles my mind that as people get older, like what we see is that the way that people get categorized as they get older is that they become almost homogenous. And we see that in age ranges, so it's quite common, I think, if you are filling out any kind of a form or completing a survey, that you'll see an age range that just says 65 plus. So, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 plus. And I think the really interesting thing about that is that people actually become more complex, more complicated, more diverse as they age. But we kind of tend to lump everybody together. So that's one thing I think, we should be drawing on people's experience, and yet people's experience as an older person is often seen as a negative or a liability when it comes to applying for a job. People are always looking at lots of job ads, and you'll see it where they're advertised for somebody who's energetic, a recent graduate, and I think these turn people off wanting to apply. And so we're missing out. We're missing out on this experience that's been collected over the years. And then there's really good evidence that older people, besides, challenging the idea that people aren't tech savvy, because they are, and people can learn, and we continue to learn as we age, but we don't stop doing that. There's really good evidence that older people are more calm in the workplace when it comes to solving problems. So problems, because they probably come against it before. They probably experienced something similar before, so they can apply their experience. And I think this is something that for younger generations in the workplace, that it's really important to have those people in there. And I feel like we are really missing out. The other thing about that is that I think if we go on the same trajectory and we don't start to challenge some of these ideas, and you mentioned aged care, and I've been lucky enough in the last 12 months to do a bit of work in aged care settings, implementing virtual reality. And some aged care settings are great. They're really starting to shift that institutional model. Others are kind of sticking with the same old institutional model that we've seen over the last probably 50 years. It costs a lot. And if we start to shift some of these models, what we see is that they don't cost as much. So at the very, very, barest of economic levels, if we're just talking about the bottom line, then challenging ageism is actually better for your bottom line. And we see that in workplaces as well as in aged care settings, and a whole range of other settings as well.
That's wonderful. Everybody loves something that helps their bottom line.
I think it motivates, right? It motivates people to do something.
Exactly.
And as much as I hate it, I feel like, you should like be doing these things because you have there's a social good or the motivation to make a better world. I get it. People don't, that's not the thing that necessarily drives everybody. So the bottom line is a wonderful lever.
Yeah, and it works, like you said. I mean, there's evidence to do so, and there's a lot of value in the workforce when you have somebody who's older, who has gone through stressful situations, and they know how to approach them being calm, and they can teach a younger person that, there's that movie what's that movie that came out a few years ago with Robert De Niro and Anne Hathaway, like The Intern? Something like that. Yeah. I feel like more people should try to watch that because, of course it's a comedy film, but it's also that feel good. Like, hey, there's a lot of value that I can still provide to you as a young person. And I can teach you these things if you give me a chance and open up and not just judge me immediately because, oh, I'm old, forget this person. Before we really get into it, because I want to know more about what you've learned throughout your travels in Australia and speaking with people and some of the things that you've been able to apply to kind of make this kind of overcome this for people as well. But before we kind of get into that, I want to ask a little bit too, because I think one thing that we haven't quite talked about is why aging kind of makes people so uncomfortable. What is it about aging that makes people cringe? This is human history. I mean, think about the fountain of youth when the Europeans were coming over to the Americas. It was, where's the fountain of youth? I need to stay young. And that's when people were dying real young, comparatively to now, and it was still that. So for me, I guess if I were as a younger person who hasn't aged quite a bit yet, what I guess makes me the most nervous is the lack of kind of physical skills that I have, and maybe just deteriorating a little bit like that. Other than that, I enjoy getting older because I'm not as dumb. I'm wiser. I make more educated decisions. I have more life experience, and it's better. But what do you think it is about aging that makes people so uncomfortable to talk about?
I think there's a couple of things in there. I think people don't like talking about death, and obviously the older we get, the closer we get to death. And I think there's a real fear of death, and we don't talk about it much as a topic. And I think that's definitely something that people maybe unconsciously hold within themselves, that there's a fear of that and a fear of facing death. I think the other part of that, though, is also a fear of disability. So, like that idea of like that as I get older, my body is going to wear out a little bit, and there are going to be things that I can't do that I do now that I like doing. Part of that, I think, is like we have a bit of ableism is kind of intertwined in with that, I think, as well. So that I think a sense that somehow we're lesser if we aren't as physically able as we once were. And I, as a woman of 55, I feel that sometimes, I have days where I think, there's like, my shoulder is creaky and it's not working properly, and my range of motion isn't as good as it used to be. And if I go for a run, I can hear my knees, both of them, making clicking noises. But I don't feel, I think it's really important to like not define yourself by those things. So, and I feel like that's maybe what we do when we project old age. And Ashton Applewhite has this great line from her book, The Aging Manifesto, where she talks about ageism as being the only prejudice that we hold against ourselves. So when we're talking about ageism and growing older, we're actually being prejudiced against our own selves, because we are going to get there and we are going to be older. And we need that little moment of being able to think, what would it be like when we are 80 or 90? How do we imagine that we would be in the world? And I think shift our own perspective. I don't think, I personally imagine myself as a really incredible 80 to 90-year-old, and I'm not sure how long I'll live or how long I want to live. I think that's probably 80 to 90 feels like a really good place. It feels like a good spot. And with a lot of experience to pass on, just, whether my body is working really well or not. So I don't feel like that should be something that we define ourselves by. But I think that that's probably the thing that we do. And, and obviously youth is something that if we look around us and we look at advertising and media and the things that bombard us on a daily basis, it's often about staying young and looking young, and how do we do that, and how the systems kind of feed into that as well. And again, it's not just for women; it's for men as well. But I do feel like that gendered aging is a bit stronger in our media. So film and TV, if we could see more older women in roles that aren't just a benevolent grandmother or the oracle, I think that would be fantastic. And the same for men, like we do see a few more roles in there for men, I think, but not so many for women. I think that's something that I would love to see shift, and see if there's a bit of a shift in people's attitudes in general as a result of that. I feel like there would be.
I think so. I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I don't think there's any question that women are far more pressured than men to age more youthfully, for lack of a better word. I don't really know how to say that, but to age to make themselves look younger as they grow older. I think there's way more pressure to that. And, I think sometimes people, say men age better or they look better as they get older, like the silver fox, right? You have that saying, right? But, and you look at media and TV and movies, there's always an older man with a much younger woman in a starring role. Like, why can't that woman in that starring role, if that guy's, Tom Cruise, why does he have to have a 30-year-old, starring woman next to him when he's in his 50s? Why can't it be the same type of representation there? So I think you're spot on that front as well.
It's starting to happen. It's starting to happen.
Yeah, it's getting better.
There's a couple of movies out now. I think one with Emma Thompson and where she has a younger lover.
There we go.
And I think it's a very interesting film, and I think there are some more outspoken women who are challenging some of those ideas as well. So it's starting to happen, but it's
I think too that it's a little bit more accepted now that some of those younger women stars in the early 2000s and 90s who are getting a little bit older are able to, now they're more comfortable going out. Like, what the hell? Why aren't I getting this role? You know what I mean? What happened? I'm a star. I should be getting this role, and you're just doing it just because I'm older now? Doesn't make any sense. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with you. I definitely see the changes, and I think it is moving forward, which is good. And speaking of moving forward, Leonie, I'd love to learn a lot more about what the aging revolution is doing to help kind of combat this right now. You had mentioned traveling through Australia and trying different resources and strategies. Could you go ahead and provide a little bit more detail of your findings and things of that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. So like when we finished our road trip, we did kind of move into the tech space a little bit initially with looking at how could we, because one of the things that we heard from people was that as they grow older, their caring responsibilities become bigger. So they're maybe not just caring for younger people, but caring for the older people in their family as well. So a little bit like what you were saying with your extended family, there's that responsibility to look after the older people in your family. But there were no really good resources around how to do that from the person's perspective. So what we typically saw was that there might be maybe you're caring for your dad or your mum, and they have to go see different health professionals, maybe the physiotherapist, maybe their general everyday doctor, maybe a couple of specialists in there. And all of those people hold notes and records about that person. And as a person who was doing the caring and the person who's being cared for, you don't have a single place to put all of that information. So that was one of the first things that we tackled with the development of an app. That one is actually in the works now, and hopefully we'll have a prototype coming out by the end of the year. So we actually went through an accelerator program with that one, had a few co-founder issues with some in a previous incarnation, and now hopefully we've shifted and moved it, and we're going to have a prototype happening by the end of the year. That's one project. We've done a bit of work around visual ageism. So kind of what we were just talking about, when we think about the diversity of older people, the imagery that we see of older people doesn't match it. So we don't see very many images of the gay community represented as older people. We don't see very many images of people of colour. We don't see many images of people in intergenerational situations. We tend to see couples or people on their own, and generally they're white and middle class looking. these are the fairly stock standard images that we've seen over the last 10 to 20 years. We wanted to challenge that with photos that weren't like that at all. So we talked to 10 photographers and have pulled together a set of images that we're going to exhibit online, and we're launching that on October the 7th. So it'll be called Pick Me, Pikme, and about picturing yourself. And what we would like to do is encourage people to share their own images of themselves as diverse elders in our community, and start challenging those narratives around what it looks like to grow older. And one of our other projects that we've got on the boil at the moment is, we talked a little bit about death earlier. We've worked with the Australian Centre for Social Innovation over here to develop a deck of cards, a game about dying and death. It's a little bit irreverent. So if you think sort of death conversations with a Cards Against Humanity kind of vibe, that's the game. It's called Carked It, which is, there you go, which in Australian slang means dying. So Carked It, you can look it up, Carkedit. That game is, we just did a Kickstarter. It's just been double what we asked for, and we're going to be launching that game by the end of the year as well. So 2022 has been a bit of a big year for us, with finally getting things off the boil and out into the public space.
Yeah, sounds like it. Hard at work. Love it. Lots of innovation. And I think it's important to be innovating about these things as well. I love the card game, talking about death and kind of putting a humor twist to it as well, to kind of encourage more people to be a little bit more comfortable with that conversation as well. And I think that'll really help coming to grips with aging too on that front. Leonie, something else that you said in that you had mentioned before is kind of tech and utilizing technology, and this new app that you've been developing that you hope to have a prototype by the end of the year. You mentioned VR a little bit earlier. How do you think that in the future will continue to kind of help to defeat misconceptions about aging and to make people a little bit more comfortable with the fact that they are aging?
Oh, look, the whole VR space is really, really interesting, because I think what we're starting to see now is people are starting to talk a lot more about the metaverse. So with another company that was kind of an offshoot of the aging revolution, People Tech, we build VR that challenges people's unconscious bias. So obviously, ageism is one of those unconscious bias that we want to get people to experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of ageism. So at a very basic level, VR can give you that perspective shift. Because it's immersive, you can be somebody else. You can feel what it's like to have discrimination coming at you, and you can have that empathy experience. With the metaverse, I think we're presented with a whole other set of issues that pop up around ageism, because typically software engineers and programmers, people in the industry, tend to be younger. And not only that, they tend to be male. So there's a couple of double whammies there. So it's a space where I think we can probably challenge aging and ageism a lot, even right down to the kinds of avatars that we create, how we represent ourselves in the metaverse. So, we don't have to look like Will and Leonie in the metaverse. We can look a different way if we want to. What do we get to choose from, and how do we start to influence at a really ground level how these worlds are created and what's in them? You also don't have to have a disability. You don't have to be the way you are at all. So you can really play with that a lot. And I think there's just it's a wide open space that we really need to make sure that we're building it as inclusively as possible. We want to remind people that we don't want to replicate an inequitable or an uninclusive world. We want the metaverse to be inclusive for everybody. For older people, I think that's really interesting. So I mentioned working in aged care settings with older people, and we were really fortunate to be a part of a project. We project managed it with a university here, where we went into 3 different aged care centres and delivered a VR program to older people. And it really showed me how much this technology around VR can be a leveler, because there were people there who said, like, oh, I find it difficult to use an iPhone, the iPad, but I can use VR and I can have this conversation with my grandkids and my kids about this amazing technology that I've been able to experience and I've been able to use. So there's the potential for that technology to, be so accessible that we remove some of those barriers that might exist currently around tech for older people, particularly people at the very old end of the scale, and give opportunities to do things that people have never done before. So, we're really privileged to see people go, well, I want to go skydiving. Muriel in her 90s, that's what she wanted to do, and she loved it. Or I want to go swimming with the dolphins, or swim on the Great Barrier Reef, or take a hot air balloon across the Swiss Alps. And VR gives you that potential to do that, and the ability to have those experiences when you're sitting at home in the comfort of your own, living room and in your lounge. So I just feel like that there's a lot of potential there to really shift attitudes and make sure that we're getting things right from the beginning.
Yeah, VR is such a fascinating space to me. Well, number one, just the fact that you can literally replicate almost anything. And like you just said, if you want to go take a hot air balloon across the Swiss Alps, which might be the only time you'd ever find me in a hot air balloon is in a VR space where I know I ain't going to die. But, anything like that, swimming with the dolphins, from that level, it's crazy. But the one thing that you made a great comment on was the inclusivity. I think what we've done and what we've seen in real life is a product of just like, just kind of how things went. I don't think it was as conscious, but now that we have this knowledge and information, we can be very intentional about what we're building and say, hey, look, we know that this is a problem in real life. So now we can kind of fix it in the VR world where we don't have those same issues, where it's inclusive. Everybody is on an even playing field, if you will, and can do a lot of great things. So I think that's pretty cool. Definitely going to be in touch with you on that to see how that kind of continues to evolve over time and in the years as it continues. Leonie, from your perspective, what do you think are the most important benefits of creating kind of a more inclusive culture between generations and age gaps and things of that nature as well? Something from my own experience here in the U.S., what we see from the news, you mentioned the word boomers earlier and how you didn't like that. That's become a cry amongst people in my generation and even younger people. Oh, God, the boomer said this. Oh, it's a boomer. I mean, I think there was even a trend on social media that was about boomer. And that's a negative context to me. And there's always going to be a divide in the way that, a generation 50 years older than you thinks and perceives the world versus how you might think and perceive the world, because things change and we learn new things. Yeah. And that same thing is going to happen as we continue to get older for me, as it is for the kids that are 4, and it's always going to have a thing. So for me, I think the direct benefit, if we can bridge that gap and encourage more conversation and encourage more relationships, to go back to the root of what you said, where people just don't have relationships with elderly people sometimes. I think to me, that would help solve at least that thing, would be a great benefit for society, maybe less division politically and things of that nature. But what do you think would be the kind of the biggest benefits of connecting people that are several generations apart and allowing open conversation?
It's a really interesting question, and I think there's that there's that whole I don't know why we do it, but we kind of have this whole binary thing, don't we? We kind of go like old, young, and that's it, and it feels divisive, and I feel like the generational and the generation gap is one of those things that gets pulled out sometimes when politicians want to distract us from more important issues. Sometimes I feel, but it's an unnecessary divide. That's how I feel about it. I don't feel like we. I don't think we can categorize generations so clearly. And to me, one of the benefits of having that intergenerational contact is that we get to understand somebody else's perspective. And in our society, often what we do is we don't listen. We don't listen to other people. We tend to kind of form our own decisions and our own thoughts and opinions without necessarily listening to other people, and then kind of take that path. I think intergenerational connection means we have to listen a little bit more closely. And I have a really wonderful example of that, because like I said, my mum's in her 80s and my partner's mum is in her 70s. And she came to visit us recently from the UK, and she stayed with us for 6 weeks. And it was wonderful. We really enjoyed having her live with us for 6 weeks. And she's a very dynamic person. She's always been super active, and she's really fit. So she runs rings around me. I can't keep up with her. But she had a very interesting conversation with my 18-year-old, and that's a pretty big age gap, and she doesn't get to see and talk to very many 18-year-olds in her daily life, and he doesn't get to talk to that many 73-year-olds in his daily life. So they had a conversation about gender and people who are transgender and the transgender community, and they had a conversation about pronouns, and she couldn't really understand why there was a fuss about people's pronouns. And he explained it to her in a really lovely way and was talking to her about his experience with his peers and how they use pronouns and how they introduce themselves to each other. And I feel like she came away from it with a really different perspective than I think that she might have got from talking to somebody in her own age group or even my age group. And he came away with it with a really different perspective, kind of realising that maybe not everybody thinks the same way that he does too, and that there are some things that just have more importance in an 18-year-old's life than they do in a 73-year-old's life, and how do you bridge that gap? And I just thought it was a really, I think it was a really beautiful conversation that they had, and I listened to it and was amazed by it and thought that's kind of what we need to do. We need to be having these conversations between younger and older people, and not just like 18-year-olds and teenagers and much older people, but I think, across all age ranges, that we just don't do that enough. We don't listen. We don't try and understand other people's perspectives. And to me, that's one thing that having that intergenerational contact can do. I think the other thing is that then, he was on a mission also to introduce her to as much of his music as possible, and she was really open to that and listened to hip hop music, which he would never listen to, and then she got him listening to some of the music that she enjoys, which he would never have listened to, and they both discovered stuff that they liked that they wouldn't have found otherwise. And I think that's a really great thing about intergenerational connection as well, is that it can spark inspiration or a joy of something that you might not have ever, the algorithms in our life dictate so much to us at the moment that sometimes I think we don't explore and we don't discover. But having that intergenerational connection means that you can find out things that you wouldn't have come across otherwise. So I think that's really important as well. And I saw something on a friend's LinkedIn the other day, another woman in the US, Jeanette Liardi, who writes really amazing pieces on ageism. And she was talking about the fact that most gerontologists have had that intergenerational contact and intergenerational significant relationship. And so, if we want to have better healthcare, if we want to have a better system, then we need people in professional roles who have had that relationship and who have a sense of empathy towards what it's like getting older and being older. And that's really, really important. If we want to change products and services, then we need people who understand what it's like and can have that connection with older people. So I think those things are really important.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, especially when you have that kind of mutual respect, as a grandparent to the grandson as well, when you have that age gap and there's already that connection, right? And that mutual respect. And it's like, I will be willing to listen to you. You will be willing to listen to me. And you kind of have that type of conversation, and I think that's true across the board. I mean, I think about some of these viral videos on TikTok or Instagram and things of that. How many of them, some of the videos that get the most views are the ones where you take a young person and they have an older person dance into some hip hop or new music because they love it. They think it's great and it's hilarious. And it's really just the important step to making that openness available on that front, right? And it's the openness of the elderly person and the openness of the younger person to kind of bridge that gap. And instead of just immediately labeling someone as something, be like, hey, why don't you talk to someone who's 50, 60 years older than you, grew up before any of these things even existed or meant anything. And instead of just pushing them off, understand why, and then educate them, and vice versa, right? And say, hey, look, we did it this way for this reason. We think it's great. I just don't understand, why is this important, and then I think there's a lot to be kind of said for that. And then to comment on the services and the products, there's a big gap. I mean, people don't design products for people that are elderly these days. Nobody creates an application or a product that's specifically for someone who's 65 plus, or anything like that, right? And again, I just used what you said, the age, 65 plus, not even including the other differences within that. So that's one thing I think we need to improve on in the services too. And I think that the VR and the AR is a great way to kind of continue and connect with that a little bit, but most importantly too, I think applying it into real life scenarios as well. But, Leonie, I'd love for you to share your experience as you've aged and as you continue to get older on that front as well. What was it? When did you kind of have that perspective and click like, oh, it's not bad to age. This is great, and these are the benefits I'm feeling. I know you mentioned the knees and running, that maybe that not so great, but the same part of it, as you age as well, you get more knowledge and stuff. So I'd love for you to just kind of share your experience to the audience as well in terms of what you've been thinking of aging.
Yeah, absolutely. So I for a long time, I don't think I thought about it at all. I think I actually was probably I probably was ageist in a lot of ways as well. So I worked in government in a social policy area, and I worked with older people. And I think probably a lot of the time what I was doing was sort of othering, so I was kind of like talking about older people as if they were like not me. And I realized that and thought, actually, that is me. And I kind of had to have a bit of my own internal journey, I think, around ageism, because, we do it to ourselves as well. And, you see it when people kind of go like, oh, I'm too old for that. So I tried really purposefully to challenge that in myself. Skateboarding, I took up like learning how to skateboard when I was about 48. And I'd never skateboarded before, ever. Even though I had boyfriends who skateboarded, I never did it. So I think that was one of those things where I thought, well, why did I not do that? And now I'm 48. Why should I not do that now? I think I'm just going to give it a go, and much to my son's delight. And I did it. And I wouldn't say it was amazing. I can move along and do a few things, but it was something that I think it felt like challenging my own internal prejudice. I let my hair go grey as well. So for many years, I dyed my hair black. It was pretty dark anyway, and I would always see these grey hairs, and then I'd think, oh, I need to cover them up. And around the age of about 45, I just went, do you know, why am I doing that? Like, I don't know why I'm dyeing my hair all of the time. Feel like I'm feeding into some kind of stereotype about like what I should be looking like and how bad could it be to have grey hair. So I let it grow out, and some of my friends were really challenged by that. So some of my female friends were like, what are you doing? You're going to look so much older and you're letting yourself go. And I thought, well, am I? I don't know. I'm like being me. I'm being who I am. And maybe it's not for everybody, and that's fine. I think we kind of have to do this stuff in our own way. But I did see something the other day that really resonated with me as well. And it was saying, sometimes we look at, we do things for ourselves that maybe are good for us as individuals, that the things that we do that we feel like we should do for our own selves as individuals, and maybe continuing to dye our hair or continuing to, wear makeup or get Botox or whatever these things are, we might do that. But let's have a think about what's the good for the population at large in terms of like oppression, which sounds really dramatic, but when it comes to grey hair. But in my mind, I thought, like having grey hair sends a signal at a higher level that it's okay to be an older woman and have grey hair. It's okay to have grey hair when you're young too. It's like not embarrassing, and it shouldn't be shameful, and it shouldn't be this thing that we worry so much about. So that was another thing. And I've also kind of gone through the whole perimenopause and menopausal thing, which most women I think find really uncomfortable to talk about and don't want to talk about it and want to kind of push it away to one side. But I think it's also a really important phase for women in their lives to start to kind of work out again. It's a little bit like adolescence. When you go through that whole, like, who am I in the world and what am I doing here? And I think for a lot of women from the ages of about 45 to 55, it's kind of a time of doing that as well. And I think it's important to talk about that stuff. So for me, that's been amongst my friendship group. I rave on about it all the time. And I'm always amazed that every time I do, so many of my friends come back to me, and not just women friends, but male friends as well, who may be in relationship with women, or friends who are going through menopause in the trans community. And that's really even less talked about. That's just kind of really, really quiet, and share what's going on for them. So I think, like being a bit open about growing older and the things that I've gone through, it's really important. And I still struggle with it sometimes, like every now and then I go like, oh God, I've got a few more wrinkles coming, and then I kind of check myself a little bit, because I think it is important to sort of be honest about this stuff, but also know that growing older it's pretty fun, like the majority of the time I feel like I'm doing new things all the time, and I feel like, can I swear on your show? If I don't want to swear on your show, but it's like you don't care as much about what other people say. And I think that is one of the big positives of growing older, is that you can just kind of go, you know what, like, I'm like in my 50s, I'm like, what are you going to do about it? I'm going to just do this thing anyway. And if you disagree with me, that's fine. I don't need everybody to like me. And I think as a younger person, I probably felt a lot more like that. I probably was a lot more obedient and tried to fit in and people please a bit. And I don't do that as much anymore. And I'm sure that that's because I'm getting older.
Yeah, from what I've read, agreeability goes down as you get older.
Agreeability.
Yeah. And people are much more agreeable when they're younger, and they're like, yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll do whatever. Yeah, whatever. I find that as well, and I'm, in my late 20s and almost 30, the big 3-0, each decade always gives that a little significance, if you will. But I have found finding no a lot easier and being like, I just don't care. I can't be asked. Like, I just can't be bothered to do that. So, great points. Fantastic insight, Leonie. I think it's 100% true. I think growing old should be celebrated. You have one day. You have one extra day than somebody else who couldn't have that extra day. And that's how it should be looked at. As cringy as that sounds, but it's cringy because it's a little uncomfortable to think about sometimes. So, I think,
right.
Yeah, I think that you should look at it like that. And aging is a great thing and provides you with a lot of opportunities to continue to learn and create new things. That's another thing that people, I see young people amongst my friends, and they see some older person trying to learn a language or, do something. And it's me like, oh, what is this person doing here? Well, why does it matter? The person's trying to learn something. I always want to learn. I want to be that person. I want to be that guy who's trying to learn something new at 60, like that's, if I stop learning, then I feel like I'm stopped living and having purpose and all that. But who knows? We'll see. Talk to me in 30 years and we'll see if I still want to do that.
I'll talk to you before that. But definitely, I just think there was this woman that we met when we were on the road trip, and we asked her what growing old meant for her. And she said, I just see growing old as a great privilege. My husband died last year and he was 39. And I just think growing old is such a great privilege, and we should be thankful for every moment we have. And we were all in tears, but what she said was so heartfelt and true. And it's
absolutely. Yeah, it's 100% true. And like you said, it's just easy to not think about because it's uncomfortable and it can bring negativity and anxiety. But at the end of the day, you got to face it and you got to embrace it. And that's really going to be the things that make it a bit more positive for you as well. But Leonie, I'd love for you to share ways for people to connect with you. If they love what they heard what you had to say, if they want more information on the game, forgive me, I can't get that Australian slang down. I don't know what it was. Cocked it? How do you say? Cocked it.
Cocked it, yeah.
Carked it. That doesn't sound right in an American accent. We got that R. We got the hard R too much in it. So on that front, how can people kind of learn more about that? How can they connect with you? How can they be a part of, the aging revolution, people tech, and all that good stuff? So
if you Google my name, you will find me pretty much instantly, Leonie Sanderson. But the Aging Revolution has a website, the www.theagingrevolution.com. And we're on there, and you can contact us via that. And I'm probably on most of the forms of social media too. So Twitter, Instagram, you can see us in those spaces too. And happy to and reach out and connect and talk more about aging because and if you're interested in the game, we're taking orders. So and the website is carkedit.com. So. That one, you might have to look that one up.
That's all right. We'll put it in the show notes. It'll be nice and convenient.
Absolutely.
For us Americans, I can't understand what it is.
Maybe we need to change it for the American market.
No, we're a country of, diversity and learning new cultures and things of that nature. All right. So keep it that it is, and we'll figure it out. We'll learn about it.
You'll get it. Yeah.
Yeah. Leonie, is there anything else that you'd like to add here before I let you go?
Oh, look, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Chatting, and I've really, really enjoyed it. And any opportunity to talk about growing older and aging is always good fun. So thanks so much for having me on the show.
No, thank you for coming on. This has been one of my favorite conversations to have. I think it's something that people just don't talk about, and it kind of makes me excited to grow older personally when I talk to you and things of that nature. And I think it's something that's important for people to know, and I think it's underlying factor in a really important way to enjoy life as a whole. To really understand that aging is part of it and death is part of it is I think a great way, if you can come to grips with that, a great way to fully live life, for lack of a better term and another cliche, to the fullest, right? Like it's a way. Yeah, exactly. It's a great opportunity. And when you look at that versus, when you're constantly denying it or not even thinking about it and you're caught up in the everyday grind of society and things, it can really wear on you. And when you put things into perspective, I think that allows you to kind of be a little bit more free, if you will. So thanks so much for coming on the show and having this conversation with me. And I look forward to more in the future.
Fantastic. Thanks, Will.
Thank you. That is Leonie Sanderson, the co-founder of the Aging Revolution. She's also got the People Tech Revolution going on as well. All these will be in the show notes for you, so be sure to check that out to learn more. Go buy that game. It sounds fun. Cards Against Humanity, and with a death spin on it, sign me up. Sounds good. That's going to wrap up this edition of the Talkin Solutions podcast. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, I ask kindly for a nice review and a subscription. And of course, you can sign up for the newsletter to get more exclusive information and content from founders like Leonie and others who are creating great solutions for society to move it forward in a positive direction on that front. Be sure to follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn. I got a new LinkedIn that were added for the podcast, so be sure to check that out as well. And you can check it out at cheshtech.com/Talkin Solutions podcast too on that front. So I hope everybody enjoyed this week's episode. I look forward to talking with you in the next episode. And until then, I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thanks for listening to the Talkin Solutions podcast. Tune in every Wednesday for a new episode and check out all of our guests on our website at cheshtech.com. That's CHESHTECH.com to learn more as we continue our mission of supporting impact-driven founders. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Talkin Solutions Podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Talkin Solutions. If you like this episode, I'd really appreciate a review and a recommendation to a friend as we focus on highlighting these great founders and individuals providing solutions to societal problems and bringing optimism into the world.